"You always do this," my son said, his voice dropping to that careful, controlled tone he used when he was trying not to shout. "Every time we actually need you, there's always something." All I had told him was that I couldn't watch Noah for the week. I had just had a thanks in advance 5 days earlier, a transient ischemic attack. A warning stroke. My neurologist called it not the full event, but close enough that she had looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Helen, your body is telling you to stop. You need to listen." She had sent me home with a prescription, a follow-up scheduled for the following Thursday, and strict instructions. No stress, no physical exertion, no lifting, no disrupted sleep. My son Daniel called on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table in my house in Guelph, watching the February light come pale and thin through the window above the sink. I had just taken my medication with a glass of water and was trying to decide whether I had the energy to make oatmeal. His name on the phone screen made me hesitate, the same way a weather forecast makes you hesitate before you open the door. "Hey, Mum." No greeting beyond that, so Amber and I have the Vancouver conference next week. Regional Sales Summit. It runs Monday to Friday. We need you to take Noah. We're thinking drop-off Sunday evening, pick him up the following Saturday. 9 days. He was asking me to take a 7-year-old for 9 days, 4 of which fell during a school week, which meant school drop-off, lunch packing, pickup, homework, dinner, bath, stories, and getting him down by 8 while I was on blood thinners and strict medical orders to rest. I told him as calmly as I could. I explained what had happened last Thursday in the Zayre's parking lot, when the left side of my face went numb for 11 minutes and my vision went strange at the edges, and I sat in the driver's seat with the groceries melting in the back, too frightened to move. I told him my neurologist had been very clear. I said I was sorry, that I wished the timing were different, and that I could help him find a good nanny service or a family daycare with an open spot. There was a pause. Then, "You always do this." I opened my mouth, then closed it. "A thanks in advance? Isn't even a real stroke, Mum? You said yourself you felt fine after. We've had this conference booked since October. Amber's presenting. This is her biggest professional moment in years, and you're telling me you can't help because of a doctor's appointment?" It wasn't a doctor's appointment. It was a follow-up after a neurological event that could have been the prelude to something that kills people. But I didn't say that. I just said, quietly, that I was sorry and that I really couldn't. "So that's it." His voice went flat. "Fine." He hung up before I could say anything else. 40 minutes later, a text from Amber. Not from Daniel, from Amber, which told me they had talked and she had decided she was the one who should deliver it. "Helen, I think we all need some space right now. We won't be needing you to come by the house for a while. We've updated the code to the side entrance. We'll reach out when we're ready." I read it 4 times. I counted the words. I looked out the window at the yard, at the snow-covered garden where I had planted tulip bulbs in October, the same October they had apparently booked this conference without a backup plan for their child. Updated the code to the side entrance. I had been given that code 3 years ago when Daniel said it would be easier than making a spare key. I used it twice a week at minimum, picking up Noah from school on the days Amber worked late, dropping off groceries, sitting with him at the kitchen island doing the math worksheets he hated. My code, the one I had memorized the way you memorize, the things that feel permanent. I drove to their house in Waterloo anyway. The streets were slushy, the kind of wet February mess that turns the whole city gray. And I drove carefully because my neurologist had also said to avoid stress while driving. Their house was a red brick semi on a quiet crescent, a house I had helped them buy. I parked across the street and sat there for a few minutes, looking at it. The lights were on inside. Noah's green rain boots were tumbled on the front step. I could see the glow of the television through the living room blinds. I walked up and knocked. Nothing. I waited, then knocked again. I heard movement inside. A voice, Amber's, hushed and quick. The living room light shifted like someone had walked in front of it. No one came to the door. I tried the side entrance code anyway, because I suppose I needed to know for certain. I typed in the numbers I had used 100 times. The keypad flashed red. The small beep it made seemed very loud in the cold. I walked back to my car. I sat there until I stopped shaking enough to drive home safely. That evening I made soup from a can because I couldn't manage much else. I sat at the table and stared at the wall and thought about the last time I had felt this particular brand of loneliness, not the ordinary quiet of living alone, which I had made a kind of peace with after my husband Frank passed 6 years ago, but the specific cold of being shut out by someone who came from your own body. The house felt different that night, too still. On the fridge, there was a painting Noah had made in November, a lopsided orange cat he had named Mr. Flops, and a photo strip from the fall fair in September, where the two of us were laughing so hard in the photo booth that neither of us had our eyes open in a single frame. I had laughed when I printed it. I had thought, this is what I will remember when I am very old. I sat there for a long time thinking about what I had given them. Not the small things, not the Saturday mornings I drove Noah to hockey practice in the dark at 6 a.m., because Daniel said the ice time was non-negotiable and Amber had a migraine. Not the evenings I stayed late so they could go to dinner. Not the weeks I took Noah when they needed to travel light. Those things I had given freely, and I didn't count them. But there were other things. The $22,000 I gave them toward the wedding when Daniel said the venue they wanted was just slightly beyond what they had saved. The $45,000 I transferred from my RRSP, the savings Frank and I had built over 30 years as part of the down payment on their house, because the housing prices in the region had climbed so far that they couldn't qualify on their own. The $9,000 to replace Amber's car after the accident on the 401 when their insurance payout came back short. The monthly e-transfers I had been sending since Noah started full-time daycare, $700 a month, for nearly 4 years, because Amber had said daycare costs in Ontario were crushing them, and I had agreed because they were. I had never once asked for a receipt. I had never mentioned any of it at holidays. I had never put a number on it or made them feel small for needing help, because that was not who I wanted to be. But now, sitting alone in my kitchen with a thanks in advance diagnosis and a canceled entry code, I opened the calculator on my phone and I did the arithmetic. The total was $93,400. I set the phone down. I looked at the number for a while. Then I got up and went to bed and didn't sleep until almost 4 a.m. The days that followed were a strange kind of suspended quiet. I kept to my routine as best I could: oatmeal in the morning, a short walk around the block when the cold allowed it, afternoon rest the way my neurologist had told me to. My sister Ruth called every day, sometimes twice. She lived 20 minutes away in Cambridge, and she had been the one who drove me to the ER last Thursday, who sat in the waiting room for 4 hours and brought me Tim Hortons after and didn't make me talk until I was ready. She was the only one who had called to check on me since. "Has Daniel reached out?" she asked on the 4th day. No. She was quiet for a moment. And Amber? Just the one text. Ruth made a sound. I recognized the particular sound she made when she was biting back exactly what she wanted to say. "What are you going to do, hell?" I had been thinking about that. "I have an appointment on Thursday," I said, "with my neurologist. And then I'm going to make another appointment." I called the office of Patricia Osei, the estate lawyer who had helped me update my will after Frank died. I had not spoken to her in 3 years, but her assistant found my file without difficulty and booked me for the Friday after my medical appointment. I wrote it in my calendar in ink. Thursday's neurology appointment went straightforwardly. My follow-up scans looked stable. Dr. Ramirez reviewed my medications, reminded me that my risk of a full stroke in the next 90 days was elevated, and said again, with the particular clarity of someone who says important things to people who often don't hear them, "No prolonged stress, Helen. Your brain needs quiet to recover. That is not optional." I thanked her and drove home past the lake, where the ice was starting to break up at the edges. I thought about the word optional Friday morning, I put on the gray wool blazer I wore when I wanted to feel capable, and I drove downtown to Patricia Osei's office. She was a small, precise woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she listened to the whole thing without interrupting the phone call, the text, the entry code, the silence during my thanks in advance recovery. When I finished, she said, "I'm sorry. That's a painful situation. How can I help?" "I want to change my will," I said, "and I want to revoke the power of attorney I granted to Daniel 2 years ago." She nodded, made a note. "Both are within your rights. For the will, who do you want named as primary beneficiary?" "My sister Ruth Gallagher." I paused. "And I want to set up a trust for Noah, a direct trust, separate, so that whatever happens between me and his parents, he has something set aside. Something that can't be affected by their decisions." Patricia wrote steadily. "We can structure that cleanly. The POA revocation is straightforward, one signature, and it's effective immediately. The will restructure will take 2 to 3 weeks to finalize." She looked up. "There's one more thing you mentioned on the phone. The mortgage cosign. I had almost forgotten I'd brought it up. 3 years ago, when Daniel and Amber's mortgage application came back just short, the bank had asked for a cosigner. I had agreed in less than a day. Didn't read the full document closely enough to understand that I had taken on legal liability for a debt I had no ownership stake in their house, their equity, my name on the line." Patricia explained what she had explained on the phone. I could not remove myself unilaterally. I could, however, send a formal written notice to both the lender and Daniel, stating my intention to be released, which would create pressure on them to refinance in their name alone. "It won't happen overnight," she said. "But it starts the process." "Do it," I said. I left her office at noon feeling something I hadn't felt in several days. Not happiness, it was too early for that, but a kind of steadiness, like I had found the floor under all the fog. That afternoon, I sat down at my desk and opened my online banking. I found the recurring transfer I had set up 4 years earlier, $700 a month, auto-scheduled for the 15th, sent to Daniel's account. I had never missed one. I clicked through the menu until I found the cancellation option, and I canceled it, effective immediately. My cursor hovered over the confirmation button for a moment, then I clicked. The silence afterward was the same silence as always, but it felt different now. It felt chosen. 9 days later, my phone rang at 8. 40 inches the evening. Daniel's name on the screen. I answered. "Mum." His voice had the same controlled flatness as the last call. "The transfer didn't come through this month." "No," I said. "It won't." A beat of silence. "What do you mean it won't?" "I've canceled the automatic transfers. All of them." Another pause. Longer this time. "Is there a problem with your account?" "No problem with the account." I could hear him breathing. "Is this because of what happened? With the conference?" "It's because I've decided that my generosity shouldn't be conditional on my health," I said. "I had a thanks in advance, Daniel. A warning stroke, and your response was to tell me I was inconvenient. So, yes, this is related to what happened. We needed you." His voice tightened. "You knew how important this was for Amber. I knew I had just had a neurological event, and my doctor told me I needed rest. You knew that too." "A tia isn't." "Don't tell me what a thanks in advance is," I said, quietly but clearly. I was the one sitting in the parking lot at Zier's, not knowing if my face would come back. I was the one in emergency. I was the one who drove myself to the follow-up because no one offered to come. Silence. "The transfers are canceled," I said again. "If you'd like to talk about everything else, I'm willing to do that when you're ready to have a real conversation." He hung up without saying goodbye, which I had come to recognize as his particular way of closing a door. 20 minutes later, a text from Amber. "This is cruel, Helen. You're using money to punish us like children. I expected better from you." I read it twice, then set the phone face down and poured myself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen window watching the streetlight come on in the dark. 2 weeks passed. I went back to my book club for the first time since before my thanks in advance. I attended my follow-up appointments, took my medication carefully, went to bed at 10 o'clock. My neighbor Carol brought over a lemon loaf one afternoon and stayed for tea and didn't ask about Daniel, which was its own kind of gift. Ruth and I went to a movie on a Saturday and sat in the dark eating popcorn, and I thought, this is also my life. This part, too. I did not hear from Daniel or Amber. Noah's green rain boots were probably still on the front step in Waterloo. Or maybe not. Maybe they had taken him inside by now, tidied the step, moved forward. I didn't know. That was the part that sat heaviest. Not Daniel's anger or Amber's texts. Noah, the 7-year-old who had once fallen asleep in my lap during a thunderstorm and said, "Half asleep, Grandma? Your house smells like something good." The voicemail came on a Wednesday afternoon while I was resting. I didn't hear my phone, just found the notification when I woke up. An unknown number, which turned out to be the landline at Daniel and Amber's house, a number I hadn't seen in years because no one uses landlines anymore. I pressed play. "Grandma, it's Noah. Mummy doesn't know I called. I used the house phone because she took my tablet away." A pause, and I could hear him breathing, the way children breathe when they're trying to be very serious. "I just wanted to say, I miss you. And also that I didn't do anything wrong, right? Because Dad said you're going through something. But I don't know what that means. Are you sick? Because if you're sick, I think someone should be there with you. That's what you always say when someone's sick. You say they shouldn't be alone." Another pause. Then, quieter. "I made you a card at school. My teacher let me. I don't know when I can give it to you, but I made it." The message ended. I sat on the edge of my bed and pressed play again, and then again. On the third listen, I noticed the catch in his voice at the end, the slight waver that meant he had been trying very hard not to cry, and I set the phone down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling. He was 7. He had used the landline because his tablet had been confiscated, which probably meant he'd been told something he didn't fully understand and had acted out at home, the only way a 7-year-old knows how. He had called me because someone had told him I was going through something. The kind of vague adult language that tells children nothing except that the grown-ups are unhappy and it might be connected to them. "I don't know if I did anything wrong." He had said that. A 7-year-old was sitting inside his house, wondering if he had caused this. I saved the message. I wrote his name on a pad of paper by the phone. Not a promise, not yet. Just an acknowledgement that he was there, that I was thinking of him, that his card existed somewhere, and that mattered. 3 days later, I was at the grocery store when my phone rang. The number belonged to Hillside Public School. My heart stuttered before I even answered. It was the vice principal, a woman with a calm, careful voice. She explained that Noah had been having a difficult week, distracted in class, some trouble with his peers, and that afternoon he had gotten quite upset during a group activity and had asked to call his grandmother. He was quite insistent, she said. He said you'd understand. Is he all right? He's settled now, just a bit emotional. We've tried to reach both his parents, but I'm on my way, I said. I was listed as an emergency contact. She confirmed it while I was already walking to my car. When I got to the school office, Noah was sitting in a chair by the front desk with his backpack on his lap and his eyes very red. The moment he saw me, he got up and walked straight into my arms and didn't say anything, just pressed his face against my coat and stood there. I held him and said nothing and looked at the wall above the reception desk, which had a banner that said, "Every student belongs," and I thought about how much I loved this small person and how none of what had happened between adults had anything to do with him. The vice principal stepped aside to give us a moment, then came to let me know that given the circumstances, if I was listed as emergency contact and the parents hadn't responded, she would release Noah to me for the afternoon. I thanked her. In the car, Noah was quiet for the first few minutes. Then, "Are you still sick, Grandma?" "Getting better," I said. Slowly, Dad says you did something bad. He said it very carefully, the way children say things they're not sure they're allowed to say. I kept my eyes on the road. What do you think? I don't think you do bad things, he said. You're the nicest person I know. Nicer than my teacher even. And she's really nice. I made a sound that was almost a laugh. Dad said you took money away. I stopped giving money, I said gently. That's a little different. You know how when you lend someone a toy and they're not careful with it, and you decide you'd rather keep your toys at home? He thought about this. Yeah, I lent Tyler my Lego kit and he lost 3 pieces. Like that? He was quiet for a moment. But we're not toys, Grandma. No, I said. You're not. You're the most important person in the world to me. That's not the same thing as the money. Those are 2 completely separate things. He seemed to turn this over in his mind for the rest of the drive. I made him grilled cheese and a bowl of tomato soup. He sat at my kitchen island and told me about a science project they were doing on weather systems and how the thundersnow phenomenon was his favorite because of its name. And I listened to every word. Afterwards, he asked if he could watch TV, and I said yes. And he fell asleep on the couch 20 minutes later, shoes still on, one arm hanging off the cushion. I covered him with the blanket from the armchair and stood there a moment looking at him. This child, this completely innocent child. Amber called 45 minutes later. He's with me, I said, before she could speak. He's asleep. The school called me when they couldn't reach you or Daniel. A short silence. I had a client call that ran long. Daniel was in a meeting. We would have seen the call eventually. He was quite upset, I said. He needed someone. Another silence. I'll come get him. He's sleeping. Why don't you give it an hour? She hesitated. Then, fine. When she arrived, she stood in my doorway with her coat still on, shoulders tight. She looked tired in a way she hadn't let me see before. I stepped back to let her in. She came as far as the hallway. He can sleep a few more minutes, I said. Do you want tea? She looked like she wanted to say no. Then she said, okay. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had done all my arithmetic, where I had made the calls, where I had sat in the dark on the night this all began. She wrapped both hands around the mug and stared at it. He asked to call you, she said. Before the school called. He asked the night before. I told him not yet. I waited. I didn't think. She stopped. Started again. I knew he missed you. I didn't realize how much it was affecting him at school. He's 7, I said. He doesn't have the tools to process adults being in conflict. He just knows that something is wrong and his grandmother is gone, and it's scary. Her jaw tightened. I know that. I'm not sure you do. Or, I think you know it, but you convinced yourself the situation was my fault, so the consequences were also my fault. She looked up. You told me to stay away from my own grandchild, I said, because I couldn't watch him while recovering from a medical event. That's what happened, Amber. Not a disagreement, not a misunderstanding. You changed the entry code. You sent me a text telling me to wait until you were ready. While I was on blood thinners and strict rest orders, and no one in your household called once to ask if I was all right. She looked away. Her hands tightened around the mug. Daniel was frustrated. We both were. The timing was really bad. The timing was bad for me too. I know, she said it quietly. I know it was. We sat in silence for a moment. From the living room came the soft sound of Noah breathing in sleep. The money, she said. Not accusatory this time. Almost a question. I've made some changes to my financial arrangements, I said, and to my estate plan. She absorbed this. I watched the calculation move across her face, and I felt something that was not unkindness, but was very clear-eyed. I had once given without looking at who I was giving to. I could not do that anymore. I would not. Is there can we? She stopped, which was probably the most honest she had been since she sat down. She didn't know what she was asking for. I don't know yet, I said honestly. I need some time to see what a different version of this looks like. One where I'm a person with limits, not just a resource. I never thought of you as, You changed the code, Amber. I kept my voice even. That's what someone does with a resource that's failed to perform, not with a person. She flinched. A real one. Noah appeared in the doorway, his hair pressed flat on one side from the cushion, shoes still on. "Mom," he said. Then immediately, "Grandma, I forgot to show you the card." He dug into his backpack and produced a folded piece of construction paper. On the front, in blue crayon, "Get better, Grandma." Inside, a drawing of two people, one small, one larger, both with approximately circular heads and excellent smiles, standing next to what appeared to be an orange cat. "That's Mr. Flops," he explained, pointing. "From the painting, I gave him back to you in the picture, so you'd have company." I looked at the card for a long time. "This is the best card I've ever received," I said, which was completely true. Amber was watching him, and something in her face had shifted, not dramatically, not the way it happens in films, but in the small, quiet way things shift in real life. She looked at her son and then at me, and something rearranged itself behind her eyes. Noah looked between us. "Are you friends again?" I looked at Amber. She looked at me. "We're working on it," I said. He seemed satisfied with this, in the way that children are satisfied with honest answers. He climbed onto the stool at the island and asked if there was any more soup. I made him a bowl. Amber stayed. She didn't stay long, an hour, maybe a little more. She didn't apologize cleanly, and I didn't expect her to. People like Amber don't apologize the way you want them to. They apologize sideways, in practical gestures, in the way she washed up the soup bowls without being asked, and helped Noah find his other boot, and said, when she was leaving, "The neurologist appointment went all right?" "The last one?" "It did," I said. "Thank you for asking." Daniel called 2 days later. It was a Sunday morning, which meant he had thought about it, waited, chosen the time. His voice was flatter than usual, but without the controlled hostility of before. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not much preamble. The way I responded when you told me about the thanks in advance, I didn't. I minimized it. I shouldn't have. I waited. And the text, with the code, that wasn't right." "No," I said. "It wasn't." He exhaled slowly. "I don't really know what I expected. I think I thought you'd always just be there. And when you said no, I reacted like you'd done something to me, instead of—" He stopped. "Instead of the other thing. Instead of having a stroke warning," I said. "Yeah." We were quiet for a moment. "The changes I've made," I said. "The financial ones. Those stand. I'm not going back to the way things were. Not because I'm angry, but because the way things were wasn't working." "I know." He paused. "Ruth told me what I looked like from the outside. She wasn't very gentle about it. That made me smile a little, privately. Ruth was never very gentle, which was one of the things I loved most about her. We can build something different, I said. I still want to be part of Noah's life. I still want to know you. But not the way it was, Daniel. Not where I get everything and it becomes invisible, and the first time I can't give, I become a problem to be managed. I don't want that either, he said. And I believed him, or I believed he believed it, which was a start. Then we figure it out slowly, I said, with different terms. He agreed to that. We didn't say much else, which was fine. Some things don't need a lot of words in the early stages. They just need two people who are willing to begin. After we hung up, I sat for a while at the kitchen table with the phone in my hand. Outside, a cardinal had landed on the feeder Ruth had helped me put up in January, a red, so bright against the snow it looked almost impossible, the way some things do when you stop expecting beauty, and then it shows up anyway. My phone buzzed. A text from Ruth. Heard from Daniel. How are you? I typed back, good, I think. Actually good. She sent back a single word. Finally, I set the phone down and looked at the kitchen. The ordinary good things of it, the card from Noah on the fridge, the books stacked on the counter, the mug with the chip in the handle I never replaced because Frank had bought it at a market in Prince Edward County and it still held heat perfectly, the small evidence of a life that belonged to me. I did not know what would come next. I didn't know if Daniel and Amber would hold to different terms, or whether, with time, old patterns would try to reassert themselves. I didn't know if the fragile thing we had started to build would hold up under the weight of real life. But I knew something I had not known 6 weeks ago, when I sat in a parking lot not knowing if the feeling in my face would return. I knew that I was not obligated to arrange myself around other people's convenience. I knew that No had not destroyed anything that truly mattered, and the things it had seemed to disturb had perhaps been more fragile than I had understood. I knew that Ruth had driven me to emergency and stayed 4 hours, and that Noah had used the landline and left a voicemail and drawn me an orange cat, and that those 2 things were what real family looked like. I took my afternoon medication with a full glass of water. I called Ruth, and we made plans for Thursday. I went out to the garden, even though it was cold, and I stood in the February light and looked at the place where the tulips were waiting under the snow patient, certain, absolutely sure that spring was still coming. I was still here. My heart was still working. That was enough to begin again. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you've ever been made to feel that your limits were a betrayal, know that choosing yourself is not selfishness, it's survival. Leave a comment below and follow along for more stories that say the things we carry quietly.